Hello, everyone. I'm Cynthia Myers-Morrison, and I am your Food Addiction Institute person that has the pleasure of talking with Dr. David Unwin. And today is such a delight for me. I spoke with Jen Unwin, another Dr. Unwin, a psychologist, and that recording will be available for Food Addiction Institute. And now this one with Dr. David Unwin will be available on Food Addiction Institute YouTube. So please join us and enjoy this and all of the other YouTubes that are available for you. Dr. David Unwin works at the Norwood NHS Surgery in Southport, Liverpool, UK, where he has helped care for the practice of 9,700 people since 1986 as a family doctor. To date, 106 of 206 of his patients with type 2 diabetes have achieved drug-free remission. I just want to shout this from the rooftops. This gives a remission rate of 50% at 30 months duration of those choosing a low-carb diet. And it's lower carb diet. This equates to a remission rate of over 20% of the diabetic population of the entire practice. One of the best results of any clinic in the world. He, for the past few years, has been a UK Royal College of General Practitioners expert clinical advisor on diabetes. David also was elected to fellowship of the college for his work in the training of trainee general practitioners. I'm glad. As the result of his interest in both better communication with patients and type 2 diabetes, he was made Royal College of General Practice National Champion for Collaborative Care and Support Planning in Obesity and Diabetes in 2015. In 2016, he was the proud UK national winner of the NHS Innovator of the Year Award for published research into lifestyle changes, working with patients' personal health goals as an alternative to drug therapy in type 2 diabetes, so that his GP practice spends £61,000 per year less than expected on drugs for diabetes. As part of this, he has also published research into improving blood pressure, lipid profiles, liver function by reducing dietary carbohydrate, especially sugar. In 2019, he was shortlisted by NICE, N-I-C-E, for a prize for his teaspoon of sugar infographics, which have now been translated into 14 languages, including Malaysian. In 2021, one of his papers was voted as Paper of the Year by the International Academy of Nutrition Educators. Dr. Unwin's work has been covered by both BBC, C4, and C5 television, The New Scientist, The Times, The Daily Mail, and the British Medical Journal. Further recognition came recently when David was invited to become an ambassador for the UK All-Party Parliamentary Group on Diabetes. As at Low Carb GP, he has over 67,000 followers on Twitter. I feel like I'm with royalty here.
Stop.
Dr. David Unwin, I am so pleased, both professionally to have the opportunity to interview you, and personally because I have members of family that I have lost to diabetes and the horrors of that disease, and that you are making such inroads for the possibilities of all the family members in the future and all of the others in the world. So personally and professionally, I welcome you, and I'm so thrilled that you're here. And I understand you have a PowerPoint to share with us.
I have. So Cynthia, bless you for that very warm introduction, and I hope the viewers find it time well spent listening to the next hour. Just as you mentioned, I thought it might help people if I did a short PowerPoint, sort of setting out the groundwork of what's happened in my practice and the broader world based on the work that Jen and I've done. So let's start with the PowerPoint. So a moment's messing while I share the screen. And that's there. We do slideshow from the beginning. There we are, we've started. So this PowerPoint is about how at Norwood Avenue, we help our patients to put their diabetes into remission. That's having a normal blood sugar without the use of drugs. A recurring theme for the whole practice is the use of positive psychology. That's hope. So we'll cover a little bit of that, and I'm sure Jen has done more in her presentation, and also helping people understand the physiology of why they're actually ill in the first place. So I'm fascinated by the true causes of many chronic illnesses. It's not just about diabetes. So let's move on. Sadly, our story starts rather sadly. So for years and years, I was becoming sadder and sadder as a doctor, because I just noticed that my patients with type 2 diabetes, really, they just got worse and worse, heavier and heavier, depressed, unwell. I'd add one drug and then another and another. And so I saw type 2 diabetes as a chronic, deteriorating condition, a chronic thing that just got worse. And, you know, we all become a doctor, or most people become a doctor, to try and make a difference. And I didn't feel I was making a difference. And so at the age of 55, I was all ready to pack my bags and give up as a doctor. And I hope you're all intrigued to know why is it I'm still here, because I'm now 63. So something has changed to really revolutionize how we treat people with diabetes. I think I'd summarize it as I used to find my least enjoyable patients were overweight people with type 2 diabetes. And now they're my favorite patients. I absolutely love looking after them because we're getting such good results. And it wasn't I didn't like them, it was that I was ineffective. And as I mentioned, you tend to become a doctor when you start because you want to make a difference. And I wasn't making a difference. I didn't think that I saw people looking happy or healthy. They were just on a lot of medication. I was trying to keep them alive, but that was all. It wasn't really health. I think there's a big difference between being alive and enjoying good health. So that was me in the wilderness, although I'm not there. I'm really not in the wilderness now. I want to illustrate my talk with a patient who's consented to have her data shared. I love this lady. This is Marcia. She's 52. She weighs nearly 100 kilos. She's a heavy lady. She's been using insulin for her type 2 diabetes since 2004, using a lot of insulin. And really, Marcia's experience of type 2 diabetes was that it was a chronic deteriorating condition. Over the years, she's got heavier. She has chronic pain. You'll see she's hanging onto the wall there because she normally walks with a stick. So diabetes has affected Marcia in so many ways, both psychological and physical, and she's on lots of medication to try and get her from day to day, a difficult life. The statistics behind Marcia are that her position is so common now. So in 1986, when I was a young doctor, I started in the practice, and of the approximately 9,000 patients, we had 57 with type 2 diabetes because we audited it. All these years later, we now have 472. So we've had an 8-fold increase in the number of people suffering with this disease in only a few years. This is an epidemic, and in fact, it's a pandemic because this statistic is repeated all over the world. There is no country that I know of that isn't suffering with an epidemic of obesity and type 2 diabetes. But when you think about it, why has it happened? Because it can't be genetic, can it, in 30 years? We can't all have changed genetically in just one generation. So it's something environmental that's occurring to bring about this increase in incidence of type 2 diabetes. And at least I was a bit mystified when I started this in 2012, thinking, well, why has this happened to my population? When I was little, obese people were rare, and suddenly they're everywhere, very, very common. So something was wrong, and I was at least wondering about it. Here is Cynthia now, Marcia now. So this is Marcia, standing up tall, slim. She's lost about a third of her body weight. She's been off insulin and in fact all medication for 2.5 years now. She's a totally changed woman. She's enjoying life. She's well. She's not really a patient. And Marcia's proud and I'm proud. And the good news is that we've repeated what has happened to Marcia. In fact, Cynthia told you there was 106. I saw my 112th patient yesterday afternoon. So we've repeated this miracle 112 times in our practice. And so I hope you're intrigued to know how we've done this. And again, the hint is here. It's a mixture of hope, positive psychology, and physiology. This is another statistic, and it's a depressing one. So we measure how bad somebody's diabetes is with a blood test called the Hemoglobin A1C. The Hemoglobin A1C is the average sugariness of your blood for the preceding 120 days. And for people with poorly controlled diabetes, the hemoglobin A1C of greater than 58, they're going to lose 100 life days for every year that occurs. So improving diabetic control is absolutely key to mortality. So it's really, really important work that we do this. So for every year that you have poorly controlled diabetes, it's aging you. And so having sugary blood, you can see it as linked to mortality and aging. And remember that Marcia, for years, had a hemoglobin A1C of well over 58. So for her, we've transformed her future because she now has a normal blood sugar. And so have all the other 112 patients who've managed to achieve this. Cynthia was kind enough to mention earlier on that we're not spending as much on drugs for diabetes as is average for our area. So these are nationally collected data comparing every practice in the area in terms of the spend on drugs for diabetes per 1,000 head of population. And you'll see that Norwood Avenue, my practice, we spend the least by far of all the practices, and we're actually saving about £62,000 per year on drugs for diabetes. So we're getting good results, but we're using drugs less often. Do use drugs, but not as much. And that's because we're thinking about the true cause of why people are ill, rather than medication, which is a sticking plaster sometimes, concealing the actual problem. So this is the model that I use to try and help my patients understand what's going on. So if, as I've explained, the quality of blood sugar control is key to mortality, you want well-controlled blood sugar. So if you see this barrel with sugar running in and sugar running out as a model for blood sugar control, you want the level to be fairly low in the barrel. So there are two ways that two things influence the level of sugariness in the barrel. One is the sugar running into the barrel, and the other is the sugar running out. So how does sugar get into your bloodstream? Well, pretty obviously it's from table sugar. I think you all know that. But also I had forgotten for many years that actually rice, potatoes, cereals, bread, all of these starchy foods actually digest down into surprising amounts of sugar, adding sugar to the barrel here. Now, the other way to get rid of sugar, of course, is to get rid of it by running it out of the barrel. Exercise. So that helps get rid of sugar. The drugs we use help get rid of sugar. So insulin gets rid of sugar by either pushing it into your muscles for energy. But if you eat more biscuits than you need for energy, that extra sugar is being pushed into your belly and you end up fatter. And that's what I've seen with so many of my patients. Year on year, they're getting bigger and bigger. So insulin, although it gets rid of the sugar, there is a price to be paid. The new SGLT2 inhibitor drugs cause you to wee out the sugar, which kind of works, but you're more vulnerable to thrush because of that sugary urine. So it does work, but there's a price to be paid. So I wonder whether it's more logical, really, to turn off the tap of sugar rather than using drugs or feeling you've got to run around all day. And that's what I explore with my patients. Of course, it needs care if you're on medication, because if you turn off the tap of sugar at the same time as you're on insulin, if the insulin dosage isn't adjusted, you'll have a blood sugar that's too low. So if you're on prescribed drugs, you need to work with your prescriber. But this is what my patients are doing. They're turning off the tap so that the barrel doesn't fill with sugar. There are different ways to turn off the tap. It isn't just about a low-carb diet. Bariatric surgery does this. Some of you may have heard about the shakes, the replacement shakes that some people have, which give a very low-calorie diet. So a very low-calorie diet, the low-carb diet, or bariatric surgery have all been proven to work and all been proven to bring about, for some people, drug-free type 2 diabetes remission. One of the psychological things I'd say is how I view my patients. You see, if people walking in, if I see them as a problem, it's a rather negative thing. If they see themselves as a problem, it's a negative thing. So one of the first things that Jen taught me was to see things and people as an interesting puzzle that we work together to solve rather than a problem. It's so depressing if physicians see their patients as problems. And I don't. I just say, how interesting. I wonder where that sugar came from. We need to look at that. What do you think? So first of all, see it as a puzzle, not a problem. The second thing is basically a high blood sugar is nearly always something you ate. Nearly always. Sometimes it can be medication like steroids, and sometimes it can be stress. So I know myself, if I do a public appearance, it doubles my blood sugar. So it can be stress, but I'd say 90 to 95% of high blood sugar is something you ate. And as I touched on before, it may be sugar, but it also may be something starchy, because starchy foods break down into surprising amounts of glucose. Some of you may have heard perhaps of the low GI diet, or the glycemic index. The glycemic index ranks carbohydrate foods in terms of how sugary they are. I thought that was quite useful, but my patients found it confusing when I tried to explain it to them, because the glycemic index gives results in terms of grams of glucose. And my patients are not familiar with grams of weight, and they're not really familiar with glucose because they don't cook with it, so they don't know. So I had the idea of helping people understand the consequences of what they ate in a new way. Perhaps we could recalculate the glycemic index and the glycemic load in terms of something we all understand, teaspoons of sugar. And that is what we've done here. So we redid the calculations. I got an expert on the glycemic index and the glycemic load Dr. Jeffrey Leavesey, and we published this result years ago. It was peer-reviewed. And we know from this that 150 grams of boiled rice, in terms of your blood sugar, is roughly equivalent to 10 teaspoons of sugar. That's a small helping of boiled rice is flooding you with sugar. Boiled potato, 150 grams, 9 teaspoons of sugar. French fries or chips, 7 teaspoons. These are small helpings. Spaghetti, 6. A banana, 5.7 teaspoons of sugar. Even a single slice of wholemeal bread is the same as 3 teaspoons of sugar. So it's pretty easy to see that many of you are having sugar with your sugar with your sugar. You'll start the day with breakfast cereals. You might have a glass of fresh orange juice, there's loads of sugar in that. And then you're having snacks during the day. You might have a sandwich at lunchtime, more sugar. Might have a banana after that, more sugar. And then at tea time, you might be having spaghetti or a pizza or something with rice. So you've had sugar with your sugar with your sugar all day. And you know, if you have type 2 diabetes, the actual problem is sugar is a kind of poison. So you're eating something that's slightly poisonous all day long. But the good news, the message of hope, is there are plenty of foods that don't put up your blood sugar. And this is the basis of the low carb diet. So there are plenty of things down there at the bottom that don't put up blood sugar. So a juicy steak doesn't put up blood sugar. Fish doesn't put up blood sugar. Chicken doesn't. Nuts, green vegetables, full fat dairy, eggs, all sorts of things can be eaten and they don't put up blood sugar or only a little. And that's the basis of the diet that I've been on now. I think it's 9 years. And this is the basis of the diet that my patients are on and the basis of the diet that we've published, I think in about 15 papers now it's been published. These infographics, there are actually 7 of them, and they're, as Cynthia said, I think they've been translated into 14 languages now. And towards the end of the PowerPoint, I'll show you where you can get hold of those for free, because Jen and I never make money out of anything that we do. Oh, one way you can, here we are, it's come up earlier than I expected. If you want to get these infograms, just Google the capitals PHC, which is a charity we've set up, and Unwin sugar, and you'll find them there. So this is what it looks like, the low carb diet. That's what I eat. And it looks healthy, and it is. It looks tasty, and it is. There are many, many recipe books now using these ingredients. And I love the diet I'm on. I'm very passionate about the quality of food. The reason I became a bit heavy and certainly, perhaps you should know, I became diabetic actually, was because I was greedy and I enjoyed food. I still enjoy food, but I'm slim and active now because I'm enjoying healthy food. It hasn't been a sacrifice. I love the food I eat. Jen, clever woman. So I owe such a lot to Jen because she has really thought carefully as a psychologist about how do we change behavior for the better. And nearly all chronic diseases, to improve them, you need to change behavior. One of the most important things I'd say is hope. So that when I gave Marcia, the lady you met at the beginning of the presentation, when I said, you know, there is something we can do. It's possible that I could get that weight off, and it's possible you could have less pain, and it's possible you could have a better life. She was really interested, and that's the gift of hope. And I don't think as a doctor, I used hope nearly enough for the first 25 years. I tended to scare my patients rather than give them hope. Hope is a very cheerful, powerful thing. And actually it's great for doctors as well, you know, because if you just scare people the whole time, it makes for really depressing consultations. And your relationship with patients isn't good because you just frighten them and then they don't do what you suggest. And then you're disappointed. and then they won't come back and see you. So that's a bit negative. Whereas now I'm seeing heroes in every surgery I run. I'm seeing people who are delighted to tell me of their progress. And then I'm saying, so what are you going to do next? And I'm actually paid to do this. So it's a great, cheerful journey. And I say, I owe it all to Jen. Now, so Jen is a consultant health psychologist. And she spent 2 years thinking about how could we teach healthcare professionals about using positive psychology? How could we do this? And so we distilled it, or Jen, let's be fair, Jen distilled this down into a single slide that I'm going to share with you. It took her 2 years to produce the slide you're going to see next. And I'll go through it, and then you're all experts in behavioral psychology. You should all have a certificate when we've finished. Let's do the slide. So here we are, behavioral change in 4 steps. It's called the GRIN model. So that's pretty obvious. It's G-R-I-N, GRIN. So let's see what it stands for. So the first thing is thinking about your goals. What are you hoping for? If your life improved, what could you do? I'm always asking patients this, and they say things like, well, if I was more active, I could play with the grandchildren. Or if I'd lost weight, I could wear fashionable clothes again. I'd love to do that. People have all sorts of fascinating goals. Somebody the other day said, if I had a dog groomer, which is great because that's what that lady would like to be. And talking about people's hopes is very powerful. And so Jen has taught me to try and agree on shared goals with my patients. And that feels really great when we're working. This is a collaboration. So rather than medicine being something that is done to my patients, we're working together on goals we have agreed. So weight loss is a common goal. And then I'm asking, what difference would weight loss make to your life? So I never accept that you just want to lose weight, because that's not really what's going on. You want to lose weight for a reason. What difference would it make to you? What are your goals? Or I have people who their life is dominated by, let's say, an addiction to bread. That's quite common, and it's ruining their lives. And they wish they were free of that, because if they were free of that, they could get on with other stuff and think differently and be more cheerful. All sorts of goals, and they're worth exploring. So that's G. The next is the little toolkit. And the next is R, and this stands for 2 things. It stands for resources and it stands for resilience. Every one of us has life experience. We are resourceful people. We know stuff. Maybe you've lost weight before. How did you do it? Maybe you've got a family member that would be interested in helping you and doing this with you. That's another resource. Resilience is so important. Many people suffer from all sorts of things, and yet they carry on. You know, I've got patients who are drug addicts and they seem to have very little, but actually, you know, they're still carrying on somehow to sort out accommodation, bring up children, do things. They are people with resilience, and that's worth respecting. So I'm always interested in patients' resources and sources of resilience. The next one is a little ruler, and it's to do with increments. I do a lot of work with teenagers who have problems, and actually most teenagers have goals. But what they tend not to do is have realistic small steps that are towards that goal. So I always encourage people to agree with me the first reasonable step on their journey towards their goal. So they say to me, I will give up fizzy drinks. I will give up sugar in tea and coffee, or I will give up biscuits. And then they contract, as it were, that yes, I will do this first thing. And that's the first thing they know I'm going to ask when we meet next time. How did that go? But it's a first step, because people often build on success. So a small success, then you can say, well, what are you going to do next? You did great with the sugar in tea and coffee. And then they'll say, well, I'll try and tackle, I think I eat too much ice cream or whatever. And in that way, they continue improving. So agreement on small steps, and you can do this for yourself, of course. The final thing is noticing. Jen thinks this is perhaps one of the most powerful things. So this is N for noticing, and it's instead of noticing misery in your life, which we all tend to do, we notice pain, we notice depression. Can you notice some of the happier things that happen in your life? I'll give you an example. You could go a short walk around the block where your house is, and you could spend that short walk worrying about family problems, worrying about debt, worrying about the political situation. But you're not going to enjoy the walk very much. It'll be half an hour of misery. Or you could try, while you're on the walk, to notice the sunshine, to notice birds singing, to notice how your breathing is, or all sorts of positive things. And that might be a better way to spend half an hour of your life. And I try and help my patients notice when things are doing well. I'm asking, how did it go? Have you noticed anything improve? What has improved? Because if you're in the habit of noticing what improves, that's a hint of what you might do more of. Because if it worked, why wouldn't you do more of that? And isn't that how, as we get older, isn't that about the wisdom of getting older, where you notice stuff that works and do more of it? So that's your diploma in positive psychology. You've got the GRIN model, and we have published on this as well. And if you Google GRIN in capitals and Unwin, you'll come to an open access paper that we wrote on this subject. Right, so we're coming now to some detail, some sort of scientific detail. I told you before, we've got, I think it's 15 peer-reviewed papers. This is the latest of them. This was published October, I think, last year. And we were looking at 143 patients who've been on a low-carb diet for an average of 30 months. So we're interested in what happens to these people. So if we just look at this, the first thing is on average, these people, this is the baseline and then latest follow-up. So on average, they're losing 9.5 kilos. So a kilo is 2.2 pounds. So on average, they're losing somewhere over 20 pounds. That's the average. Now, some of our patients lose a lot of weight. Many of them lose a third of their body weight. I have people who've lost 12 stone in weight. I wonder what that is in kilos or pounds, but some of them have lost a lot of weight, which is great. The average sugariness is measured by the hemoglobin A1C. So the average patient starts with a hemoglobin A1C of 65, which is really poorly controlled diabetes, and they end up, the average is 47, which is actually a hemoglobin A1C of 47 is not in the diabetic range. So this is how more or less 50% of the people who choose this approach are achieving drug-free diabetes remission. But that's not all. We were worried about they're tending to have more protein in the diet. So I'd read somewhere that protein was not good for kidney function. But the next three measures, creatinine, eGFR, and urinary ACR, are all measures of renal function. And good news, they all improved for those patients, and they improved significantly. So for those people, kidney function improved. Then the next thing was people were concerned that on the full fat dairy, they were having cream, they're having full fat yogurt, butter, stuff like that. They were worried about the lipid profiles, the cholesterol, were they fairing up their arteries? So we thought we ought to check that as well. And again, good news. So all the things we've measured, that's serum cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, and the triglyceride measures are all lipids, all improved significantly. Then finally, we looked at blood pressure. And I haven't got time to tell you today, but there's a paper, of course, published on this. And people's blood pressure, including my own, improved significantly. And we ended up stopping many, many medications for blood pressure because people felt dizzy when they stood up because their blood pressure was so good. Isn't that surprising? In fact, I found when I began, I had to hang on to the desk as I stood up. And if I hadn't had normal blood pressure for 20 years, and the reason I felt dizzy when I stood up was my blood pressure was now so good. And I now have really the blood pressure of a young person. I haven't got the rest of him, but I've got his blood pressure. So this is a little summary in terms of, this is a summary in terms of, so often I'm asked, okay, so 50% of patients achieve remission, but what happens to the others? So the actual picture, this is a pie chart. At this point, 47% of the patients were getting remission, but look how many were getting improvements in diabetic control. Only 3% of the people who cut the carbs had deteriorating diabetic control. And if you had a medication that would achieve that, you'd be very rich indeed. This is just a lifestyle. Here we come to, over the years, we're getting better and better at this. So if we look at this column, which is the percentage of people who achieve remission who try low carb, in 2017 it was 31%, is now 52%. And that's because we're getting better at helping our patients achieve remission. And if you look at the remission rate for the entire practice, so it's just an NHS practice, nobody's paying for this. We've gone from 4% in 2017, we've now got 22% of the entire practice. Because not everybody wants to try a low carb, but still, it's a big number of them and it's affecting the entire practice, and that's how we're saving money. I think one of the key things to improving data like this is the psychological stuff and helping people maintain improvement. And this, I think, comes back to how addictive sugar and starchy carbs are, and that you need resources, you need help. It's quite difficult to do it alone. And so many people go back to the bread, and then I'm helping them. I'm saying, come on, you did it before, you can do it again. Let's do a blood test in a couple of months' time. And I'll see you in a month and let's weigh you. And most people know how to do it now, they'll do it again, but they need support. Often it helps if you do it with other people. So we run a Zoom meeting once a month for anybody in the practice that wants to come. In the early days, Jen and I and 14 other clinicians set up a charity called the Public Health Collaboration. So this is a not-for-profit thing, a charity, a UK charity. And there is a resource page in the charity, and it's got my protocol for doctors and nurses, how you would do the low carb. The sugar infographics are there in all the different languages. There's booklets, there's all sorts of things. There's a free app, lots of stuff around helping you. But do remember, if you're on prescribed medication, you have to share what you're doing with the prescriber because it may affect your medication. So there we are, a mixture of physiology and behavior change. Positive psychology delivers results. And I'll just finish with a patient. I love this old guy. He's 83 and he's consented. This is Brian. He's consented to share this photo. I am holding the tape measure where Brian's tummy used to be. He's lost a lot of weight, and he was on insulin for his type 2 diabetes. He's come off insulin. He's come off all his medication. He was on stuff for blood pressure as well. He's joined a gym. He does weights 3 times a week. Clever guy, resourceful, and he's loads of fun. And he doesn't need me anymore. He's not actually a patient. And I think, oh yes, there we are. So he's lost 28% of his body weight. He's off insulin, perindopril, and glycoside. That's just a finish, a sort of cheerful thing. Well done, Brian. Those are the references for the 15 peer-reviewed papers, if any of you want to look them up. the public health collaboration, the charity I mentioned, funds open access. So a lot of these papers are open access, so you don't have to pay to read them. And Cynthia, we're done. I don't know how long that took, but you got to the end.
That was just fabulous. Bravo.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I love seeing the photographs of before and after of the clients that have been so successful. Oh, it's just breathtaking.
Good.
Well, could we hear a little bit? You've talked about your professional life and the successes there. Could we hear a little bit about your personal life, your own, and with your family? What has changed there?
Well, a lot, really. So when I was 55, I noticed that I was sleepy. And in fact, I was so sleepy that I used to, after my lunch, I needed a 20-minute nap. So I used to put do not disturb on the phone because I was senior partner. I'd pull the curtain around the couch and have a little sleep on the couch because I just felt so sleepy after I'd eaten. And then I'd have to have a coffee and some chocolate and biscuits to kind of give me the energy to manage to get through the afternoon. So I'd noticed a lack of energy. And with this, of course, I was getting middle-age spread. I felt a bit low. And one of the first things I noticed when I went low carb was I didn't need the lunchtime sleeps anymore. And food didn't make me sleepy. And the problem was, of course, I was actually diabetic. So all that sugary food I was eating was making me sleepy and I didn't realize. And then, as I say, when I stood up, my blood pressure was low, which was good. And in fact, I needed more salt in my diet because the blood pressure was so good. So there was that. One of the most important things I feel was my mental health. I found that I was less fretty. Things used to get out of proportion, and it's very worrying being a doctor, because every week we have deaths in the practice and you have to be very stable to cope with that. And also sometimes you get blamed or the relatives are not happy. So I found that I was less fretty. I coped a lot better. And instead of ruminating, I sort of got things in proportion more. So it changed my psychological outlook. And that was a surprise really for Jen and I, because so initially in life, I thought medicine was the most important thing. And I thought I was the most important thing. And then Jen taught me that psychology was important. But then we learned that diet trumps psychology because diet can change your outlook. So it wasn't that it wasn't that I'd had psychotherapy or something. I was eating differently. I was more cheerful. I needed less sleep. It was amazing. And that's the thing. And I felt younger. If you feel tired all the time and fretty and you go to work with a heavy heart and you fight your way through the day, it's very aging. And I also had a lot more energy. So in the evening, instead of waiting to go to bed, I was going a run, or we started writing papers, all sorts of things. So personally, lots of things. And of course, also very rapidly, I was enjoying medicine in a way that I hadn't previously. So retiring seemed a sad thing to do. And so I didn't, because I thought, well, I'm enjoying it. So, and then beyond that, all sorts of exciting stuff happened. So we helped develop a low carb program that 460,000 people around the world have done. And then there was a BBC One documentary called The Truth About Carbs that went out to 4.3 million people, et cetera, et cetera. And so loads of completely bonkers and unexpected, astonishing things began to happen, bearing in mind that my life up until that point had been very routine and quiet here in Southport, north of Liverpool. So there's a few answers to that. So many, many changes. Many changes.
What is it like to be a spouse of someone else whose eating is changing or not changing?
Right.
Both
okay.
changing
Well,
and not
yes,
changing.
that was all right. I get that. Yeah, that's very interesting. So Jen used to be a worry to me. I love her dearly, so much. I love her. And it was sad because I knew that there was some kind of a problem, that she wasn't as happy as she ought to be. And also she was a reasonably big woman and she didn't like being a big woman. And I knew that there was something going on with her eating, because she'd always be saying, I'm going to go on a diet tomorrow. And then weirdly, she'd say, I'll do a tray bake for the children, of which she would eat most of it. And to me, we had arguments because it was totally illogical. I couldn't understand what this clever woman, why was she doing this and making herself miserable? And that was a worry, a constant dripping tap of anxiety over why was this wonderful person. And then she'd lose loads of weight. And when she lost weight, she was really happy. But I would know it would never last. It never lasted. And it would begin with Christmas or a party, and she'd start eating, and then there'd be 2 stone back on really fast. So that I'd seen her cycle over decades like that. And that was a worry. But then as we got into low carb, Jen began to realize how that was a help to her. And she came up with, instead of thinking of herself as a mad woman, she realized that her behavior was similar to somebody with alcohol or nicotine. And what she had was a food addiction. And she wasn't a mad woman at all, but she was an addicted woman. And that for me was a much more, I understood that model completely, and I knew it was correct. And so, and she's been so much happier and effective, and she's got the weight she wanted. She's a much happier person. So I'm living with somebody who's in control, and that's great. And I don't worry about her anymore. And we've found a way to enjoy the food we eat in a sustainable way, because she's a great cook. And now we're eating low carb keto stuff. And we've done 5 recipe books as well. So we've just done our 5th recipe book. So so that great for Jen. Living with somebody was difficult and worrying, because I knew something wasn't right. And what was interesting, I suppose a lot of the partners of addicts will have found this, that if you try and say something, the person is defensive and angry. So if I'd say, listen, why are you making the tray bake on a Sunday night? The children don't need it and I'm not going to eat any. It'll be you. And she'd bite my head off because she was desperate to eat that tray bake. And then we'd have arguments because, blokes are kind of logical. And I thought, yes, but you're not being logical. So she'd just get angrier and angrier. And then we'd have unnecessary arguments, all of which have stopped. And that must be so common. It just must be so common, because I've seen it in clinical practice again and again, people crying when they admit to me that the reason they're so heavy is bread or Doritos or crisps or whatever. And of course, they're intelligent people. Jen was a consultant psychologist, and she was over 50 before she understood what her problem was. So how many people there must be out there who think, why am I doing this bonkers stuff? Do I never learn? And of course, I think the received wisdom is about moderation. So it's like, have bread in moderation, have crisps in moderation. And that makes me angry now, because I can see that for so many people, it's very almost damaging advice, because you're setting them up to fail, because then they blame themselves when they fail, because they think, what kind of a human am I? I can't have bread in the house without scoffing it at 3 a.m. And so in clinical practice, I've found this so helpful for people, that they're not mad. There is a problem, and the problem is called addiction. And once you understand what your trigger foods are, and they're not in the house, you stand a chance. And that's what Jen's work, and I think, Cynthia, your work is about. And I think its time is coming. I think for people with eyes to see, this is underpinning so many problems and ruining people's lives. And gradually I find that, so nobody's ever surprised when I say, could you be an addict to bread? Nobody's ever said, I never thought of that. The minute I say it, they're relieved because they say, I think I am. Yes. The problem is healthcare professionals don't accept this. And so they don't help patients with it because maybe they don't understand it.
Well, that's one of the things that brings up the issue of clinical utility. That's one of the phrases that we're to address for the Diagnostic Statistical Manual submission for food addiction, whatever it is we end up calling it, as a substance use disorder. So how is the clinical utility? Your research certainly documents a positive outcome.
Well, what else am I to do? You know, I think I tried everything else over the years. I tried for my patients drugs. I tried everything over 25 years. I used to try starving them as well, which was 2 tablespoons of all bran, half a pint of skim milk, and 2 multivitamin tablets or something. But not one person, I know, starving them. It was brutal. It never worked. This works again and again. And people are so grateful. It's great for the clinician because I have grateful patients. And it's great for the patients because they feel not like a mad person and they're in charge. And I absolutely support this. Needs a revolution for people to say, because otherwise there will be no help. So the problem at the moment is, of course, most doctors say this condition does not exist, therefore that you can't ask for treatment. It's utterly bonkers because there is treatment for gambling addiction when there is no substance. And, you know, and yet here we are, the psychology, the physiology is pretty well worked out of what sugar does to your brain. So if gambling addiction is a condition, I really cannot see why food addiction shouldn't be there too. And also, so how are we going to explain the terrible pandemic of obesity? What is going on? And I haven't seen any other satisfactory explanation for why people are harming themselves in such large numbers. So I'd say, well, find something that works better. Because I'm a practical doctor, so I would use it, and I haven't found anything else. And it's so useful in clinical practice. It's really useful. I'm using it in every single clinic that I do.
I'm so thrilled that you are doing this work. What has been the feedback that you've received? I mean, I understand it's changed over the years, earlier to now. What has been the feedback?
Do you mean the feedback from healthcare professionals? Yeah. So it was very difficult in the early days because, I mean, I don't understand this. I'm asking people with diabetes to cut back on sugar and starchy carbs. That should be absolutely just fine. But actually, I got hate mail from dietitians, actually. I was also shouted and booed at times when I spoke because healthcare professionals felt it was dangerous, that what I was doing was dangerous. And so I'd say, how? And of course, they did have worries about the lipid profiles or whatever, but they worried it was dangerous. And in a way, they did me a favor because that is why I started collecting clinical data. Because I thought, well, I'm only a GP, I'm not an expert. So I started really early in 2013 collecting data so that I would know whether it was dangerous or not. And over time, that has helped fuel the idea that this is a safer approach. And now low carb is broadly accepted in the diabetic world. And the American Diabetes Association now mention it as a perfectly reasonable option. And it's been accepted in Canada, in Scotland, all over the world. It's gradually being accepted. That doesn't mean all clinicians are up to date, but it is being accepted. And the body of work is now very large. It isn't just about my work at all. Many doctors all over the world have done bigger studies than me, all sorts of studies. So it's improved a lot. And I'm very busy now mainly on Zoom, but we go all over the world. I had a speaking tour in Australia. Thousands of healthcare professionals all over the world are very interested because they too want to make a difference and help their patients. So it's changed a great deal. There's still a lot of work to do. I think so many doctors still don't quite believe in their patients. They don't believe that people can change. So they say, well, I know it can work. And they're always saying, well, how is it that David, you must be a wizard. How is it that your patients change behavior because mine don't? And the answer, I think, is in Jen's psychology. And the other answer is continuity. Because I know my patients very well. So it only takes me a minute to ring them up and say, listen, your blood tests have gone sugary. Why is it? What are you doing? And they say, oh God, I knew you'd ring. It's Christmas. You leave it with me, doc, I'll fix it. And the continuity of having a family doctor who checks up and cares, and they know that I'm not critical, I don't shout, I genuinely want them to be well. And they thank me again and again for saying, I'm really glad you rang me up. I feel so much better now.
I've heard you talk before and diagram the recovery rates, and is it dragon's teeth that you've talked about where there have been blips?
Yes, it is. So what we have a lot of data on patients, so we've got lots of weights, because in the general practice in UK, people stay with their family doctor. And generally the only thing that separates you from your doctor is the death of your doctor or the death of the patient. So I've got many patients now that I've been looking after for 30, 35 years with weights all that time. And what you see with the serial dieters is a graph that's zigzagging up and down. And those are people who are starving themselves, they lose weight, then they're binging and they gain weight. And if you think about that zigzaggy pattern, I say it looks like the dragon's teeth of addiction. Something's got hold of you. When I see those dragon's teeth, that weight going up and down like Jen, I've got lots of patients that's happened. They have to have the fat wardrobe and the thin wardrobe. And they're starving themselves for somebody's wedding or a foreign holiday. And then it'll go back. And often when it goes back, they're even heavier, because in the starving, they're slowing their metabolism. So some of them end up very happy. And that's what I mean about the dragon's teeth of addiction. It's that a pattern, that zigzag of weight going up and down over the years as you starve and binge, starve and binge.
What can, again, you've mentioned what the family doctor can do. Could you talk about a friend, a partner, how best to support the changes desired by another? So someone tells you, I want these changes. How can you be the supporter?
Yes.
The giver of that?
That's a really great question, isn't it? And I suppose the grin model is very useful, because if my partner was saying, I want to lose weight, I'd be saying, well, I'm great, I'm going to support you, but what are you hoping? Can I understand what you're really hoping to achieve? What difference would that make? Because the more somebody describes a preferred future, the more detail it is, then the more likely they are to do it. And then I'd be saying, great, so how had you thought of doing this? I'm just interested, so I know how to support you. And then you become part of the resources. And then what's the first thing you'd thought of doing? That's an increment. And then the other thing is, it's noticing, you look great. I think you have lost weight. You look great. That kind of thing. And something about failure. I think I'd like to say something about, because people always say to me, well, what do you do when people gain weight? This happens a lot at Christmas or on vacation. Where somebody gains weight. So I would be saying, you wouldn't be judgmental, because people always hate themselves when they've gained weight. Instead of being judgmental, you'd say, look, never mind, that's spilt milk, but next Christmas, let's think, you and I, about how we do Christmas differently. How could we do this differently? At what point, maybe we shouldn't have chocolates on the Christmas tree. Do we have to do that? Do we have to have tubs of sweets around the house? Just what would we do differently? And then finally, of course, is by Jen's Fork in the Road book. And I must point out that we don't make money out of that. All of the profit goes to the public health collaboration. But I think it might be very helpful for people to read that, because you might understand your spouse or partner. And understanding is, a lot of people don't understand. So they say, oh, go on, it's your birthday. Go on, it's Halloween or whatever. And I think if they'd read the book, they'd see that somebody with addiction can't moderate. And if they're saying, don't offer me food, don't. Because an awful lot of people, they buy a chocolate bar for some reason and bring it home as a treat. And that is so difficult if somebody is struggling. So that's my advice. Yeah, there you go. The grin model.
Wonderful. And with children, one of the things that Jen has said in the book is that she wishes that she had read this book when she was a young person.
Yes.
And so with children and offspring, how to encourage in the same way, just do the grin model with them too?
Yeah, so we've used it's a family philosophy. So all of my children understand the grin model because we use it together, and it's a philosophy. And I've heard my children help their friends with it when a friend rings up with a problem, and I've heard them do it. I think the other thing is leading by example is very important, because if they see how we conquer a weight problem, then we're illustrating how they may do it in the future. One of the things that surprises me when I ask families is they say, oh, he's only little. Shouldn't he have what he wants? And actually, I would say, well, young people are the most precious people on the planet, and they deserve the best nutrition. And we should really think carefully, because we're setting them up to be addicts. And I know even when they get to be 15, some of them I cannot cure. I cannot, no matter how I try, they're really difficult to cure. So I think thinking about nutrition for children and giving them more protein, particularly because of the sugar with your sugar, because they're growing, eggs, cheese, meat, fish are really important. All my grandchildren are actually keto. So I have 4 grandchildren from 10, 8, 6, and 3, and they're absolutely keto. And they're so healthy, and it can be done. And they do drink water, and they do eat green veg, and they will eat half a chicken or whatever. So it can be done. But it's for each family to see. I have 3 children, and one of them didn't want to go low carb. So we just let him have bags of rice with our low carb meals. He actually gradually gained a bit of weight, and then eventually he said one day, I want to go low carb with the rest of you. He was a young man. He wanted to look handsome for the girls, and he's been low carb ever since. So sometimes it's softly, but also think about how we reward children. Think about Pavlovian conditioning, where you give a dog a biscuit if it does whatever. So should we be giving our children biscuits if they do well? Should we buy them chocolates for doing well at school? Or should we reward them with attention, or going to the pictures, or making something, or going a walk? Kids like attention, actually. What they really love is one-to-one attention. And that would be some of my guidance. But we need to be very delicate, because parents are understandably, they are doing their best. Often they're tired, they may be in debt, all sorts of things. So we have to be careful not to be judgmental or too heavy-handed with advice. Particularly, I'm a grandpa, and grandpas have to be very careful to be delicate and not too heavy with what they suggest.
Oh, David Unwin, this has been such a wide-ranging discussion and so filled with gems. You really are the making a difference. A family doctor gets there in the end. Oh my gosh. What a
Yeah.
difference you're making, not only in your family, but in the world. And I'm
Well,
so grateful to you.
bless you for that. And also for anybody that's watching this, I'm just grateful to have the chance of spreading a bit of hope and physiology. So I wish you all the best, and thank you very much for watching and listening. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our audience in terms of the Food Addiction Institute. We are grateful to have you purchase for the PHC benefit, the Fork in the Road. And I'll put in a plug for the Clubhouse Fork in the Road events.
Oh, do, yes, because Jen's on there every Wednesday night giving an hour, and I think that's going rather well.
And they have replays. So if you haven't seen them up to now, go back and click on the replays and see the variety of people that are interviewed, share, discuss, and become a regular participant too. So a little side note there. Thank you so much. We also appreciate with Food Addiction Institute your donations. So you can find us on foodaddictioninstitute.org. So thank you so much, Dr. David Unwin. You are making a difference. A family doctor gets there in the end. Thank you so much for this very personal as well as professional presentation. Very grateful.
Bless you. Bye-bye now.
You.
Goodbye.
Thank you.